A shy girl stumbles into the lavish wedding of a powerful dynasty, only to unwittingly spark the groom, a young millionaire, to call off the ceremony at the altar. But what was it in her gaze that made him abandon the life he'd so carefully planned? Some mistakes, it turns out, are the only way to truly find yourself. She wasn't invited, and worse, she arrived the very moment the bride stepped onto the altar. The music faltered for a beat as Eliza unknowingly pushed open the grand glass doors. In her hand was a worn-out tote bag, her hair tangled by the wind. The soft clack of her heels on marble echoed far too clearly in the breathless hush of the room. She didn't know where she had walked in, but everyone else did. This was not a place she belonged. The room was like an intricately embroidered tapestry, warm golden light streaming over white blooms arranged with exquisite care, every chair wrapped in lace and tied with pale yellow, bows, every guest wearing the same look, certainty that today was their day. But now a wrong thread had found its way into the pattern. Eliza stood there like a typo in a perfect paragraph. Declan Rhodes, the groom, was already in position at the end of the flower-strewn aisle, dressed in a black tuxedo tailored to precision. His gaze moved along the line of bridesmaids, paused briefly on the bride, and then suddenly turned toward the doors. He saw her. She wasn't striking in a way that seized the room, but the fact that she didn't belong made it impossible for him to look away. A stranger's face, eyes that didn't hide anything, raw, trembling, heartbreakingly alive. It had been a long time since he'd seen eyes like that. She was shivering, perhaps from the cold, perhaps from shame. Her hair fell wild across her forehead. The April wind still hadn't calmed after the afternoon rain. Her dress was soft beige fabric, old and creased at the waist, as if she'd spent 2 hours sitting alone on a nearly empty train. She hadn't meant to be here, but he, for some reason, hoped she wouldn't leave. A woman beside him tilted her head and asked under her breath, "Declan, who is that?" His fiancée Amelia followed his gaze. Her brow tightened in a flash of irritation she couldn't quite hide. Eliza startled, clutching the tote bag. She lowered her head, ready to retreat. But her legs wouldn't move. The shame had rooted her in place. She knew she was ruining something sacred and she couldn't undo it. Then, without warning, Declan stepped down from the altar. The room's stillness shattered like a pebble thrown into a still lake. Eliza watched him approach, one step at a time. Paralyzed, she knows me, he said. His voice was steady, clear, without a trace of doubt. The entire hall froze. Eliza's mouth dropped open. She shook her head, desperate to correct him. I'm not a guest. I came into the wrong room, she managed, her throat dry and raw. Maybe it's the right room, he replied, his voice low, meant only for her. His eyes didn't leave hers. Not once. Eliza didn't understand, but something inside her, some long-hidden part that always felt unseen, suddenly felt known. No one spoke during those endless seconds. Every gaze flicked between the stranger and the groom. The man who at this moment should have been pledging forever to someone else. Eliza wanted to run, and she wanted to back away, turn around, disappear. But Declan had just lied for her, because of something in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. She stammered, "I was just looking for my friend's wedding. On the 3rd floor, I got the wrong invitation. I didn't mean—" "Neither did I," he interrupted softly. She looked up, met his gaze, and for the first time, saw something in a stranger's eyes that made her heart slow down. Not love, not fate, but a quiet recognition. Two people in the wrong place at the wrong time, both realizing something in their life didn't quite fit. No one stopped her when she left. But every eye followed her, especially Declan, still motionless, watching as her back disappeared through the glass doors. Outside, Eliza stood beneath the awning, hollow, as if she had just dropped something vital and couldn't name it. Inside, the music resumed, but somewhere in the fracture of one human heart, the ceremony had lost its perfect shape. Sometimes it's a stranger who finally shows you just how long you've been wrong about your own life. She ran from the wedding, but somehow part of her stayed behind. Eliza descended the hotel steps as if each stone beneath her feet was whispering something she couldn't quite catch. No one chased after her. No one called her back. And yet, the feeling swelling in her chest wouldn't let go. A strange, uneasy ache, half embarrassment, half regret. She couldn't even name what she was mourning. A moment, a look, or a single improbable sentence from a man about to marry someone else? Maybe it's the right room. The words echoed in her mind like a voice from another world, a world where she wasn't always the outsider. She wandered the hotel halls for a few minutes before finally finding the real wedding, the one she was meant to attend. Her old college friend's ceremony had ended, the buffet was underway, and the bride, already a little drunk, didn't even notice Eliza had been missing. She stood among the laughing crowd, a glass of water in hand, and felt a hollow strangeness inside her. No one asked why she was late. No one noticed the way her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, toward the window that overlooked the garden across the hotel courtyard. And there he was, Declan Rhodes, standing alone. He hadn't returned to his own wedding. Not yet. Amelia was furious. His family, stunned. The bridesmaids and planners scrambled to manage the situation, filling the air with music and reassurances. But Declan heard none of it. He'd walked out to the hotel's back garden, standing beneath the white trellis where he'd posed for wedding photos just hours before. His mind felt cracked open, his carefully arranged thoughts collapsing beneath the weight of a single moment. She knows me. He'd said that, even though he had no idea who she was. So why did it feel true? A breeze moved through the jasmine vines, carrying the faintest scent of something soft and wild. He glanced at his palm, where a few fallen petals had landed. Weightless, just like the feeling that had touched his chest the moment she stepped into the room. Not loud, not chaotic, but everything had shifted. At that very moment, Eliza was looking for an excuse to leave. She no longer wanted to be at her friend's wedding, not because she disliked it, but because her heart still lingered in that other room. The one she'd accidentally entered, and in doing so, had been seen. She climbed a floor, walked down the long corridor toward the elevators, but stopped at the window, drawn to the distant shape of the trellis. She saw him. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his face tilted toward the sky, eyes searching for something she couldn't name. She didn't know why, but she felt it in her bones. She wasn't the only one who felt wrong in her own life. Declan eventually returned to the reception. No one said a word at first. He walked straight to his father, a man he'd spent most of his life trying to please. "I just need a minute," he said. His father gave a small nod, his eyes gone cold. Amelia approached. She wasn't angry. She was calm in a way that chilled the room. "Who is she?" Declan didn't answer right away. Who was she? He didn't know her name. But he knew that she was the only moment in the entire day that felt real, and maybe that was the scariest part. Night fell. Eliza left the hotel, but didn't go home. She wandered the quiet streets beneath trees, shedding their spring leaves. The tote bag still hung from her shoulder, and his words still rang in her ears. Maybe it's the right room. It wasn't just a polite deflection. It was something else entirely, as if he hadn't been talking about the room, but about a place in the world she hadn't even realized she was searching for. She sat down on a wooden bench by the road, watching the cars slip past, and for the first time allowed herself the question, if getting lost leads you to the right person, do you have the courage to go back? Some people don't stay long, but they leave a trace. Gentle, but impossible to erase. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people, if you've ever stood at a party and felt utterly misplaced, leave a like, to know you're not the only one. Eliza didn't go home that night. She stayed on the wooden bench for a long time, listening to the city, cars, voices, and the quiet rhythm of her own breath. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him again, that look, strange and startlingly real. And for reasons she couldn't explain, the next morning, instead of returning to her quiet routine, books, the library, a life marked by little more than order, she went back to the hotel. It was just a flimsy excuse, really, a what-if disguised as coincidence. A chance, however small, to see again the man who had said a single sentence she couldn't stop replaying. Maybe it's the right room. She had nothing to say to him if she saw him again, but she still wanted to be closer, even if it meant just standing in the corner of the lobby, pretending to wait for someone or trying to remember something she'd forgotten. And then, just as if something quiet and unseen had arranged it, Declan appeared at the opposite end of the corridor. No tuxedo, no stage lights, just a white shirt, slightly wrinkled, and a slow, unhurried step, like he had nowhere in particular to be. He saw her. They didn't speak, not at first. No one said hello, no one broke the silence. And yet, within that silence, something was already unfolding. "I didn't mean to come back," Eliza said softly, almost a whisper. Declan gave a small nod. "I didn't mean to look for you, but..." His eyes drifted past her to somewhere just beyond. Some things are hard to let go. She looked at him and saw the weariness there, not physical, something deeper. The exhaustion of someone who had lived too long inside a version of himself that didn't quite fit. "I still don't know your name," he said gently, as if speaking to the morning air. "Eliza," she replied, then added with a quiet smile, "No roads at the end." It was half a joke, but it stopped him in his tracks. Then came a laugh, soft, surprised. The first one she'd seen from him, and perhaps the first one in a long while that felt like it actually belonged to him. They walked the hallway in silence, out to the hotel's garden, the same place he had stood alone the night before. "Did you really plan to marry her?" Eliza asked. No small talk, no pretense, just a stranger's honest question. Declan didn't answer right away. He reached up, brushing his fingers lightly across the vines climbing the trellis above. "I used to think love was a decision, something you chose, something you worked hard to make right, like following a blueprint." He turned toward her then, and his eyes, no longer guarded, held something human, raw. "But then you walked in, like a mistake in the script, and now I don't know whether I should fix it or keep it." Eliza looked up at him, something heavy and quiet settling in her chest, not because he was saying sweet things, but because he meant them. They stood in a silence so full it pressed against their ribs. No need to speak, as if simply being near each other had shifted something fundamental in the air between them. Then, heels clicking on stone. Eliza turned. Amelia, in a satin dress the color of warm cream, walking into the garden. Not fast, not frantic, but each step felt like a pulse beneath Eliza's ribs. She didn't speak. She simply looked at Declan, and in her eyes were all the things she hadn't yet had a chance to say. Eliza straightened, avoiding Amelia's gaze. "I should go." Declan looked at her, as if wanting to stop her, to say something, anything, but there wasn't time. Eliza gave them both a soft nod, then turned away. Her footsteps faded, leaving behind a stillness that clung to the edges of the garden, where a man was now beginning to question everything he had once been so sure of. But this time, as Eliza walked away, her heart didn't panic. It simply whispered one quiet question. If every part of him could tremble after one brief conversation, what exactly had they touched? She walked away, leaving behind two gazes, one bewildered, the other stretched thin like a wire about to snap. And this time, no one called her back, not because they didn't want to, but because no one had the courage to reach for anything, not when the world around them was already beginning to crumble. Amelia said nothing on the walk back to the ballroom, but the silence itself was louder than any fury. Declan followed, too scattered to compose an excuse. Every possible explanation shattered in his mind like fractured glass. To everyone else, he was the groom, the man who had it all. A T. Man born to inherit, to stand tall at the altar, to never waver. But he had wavered, all because of one unfamiliar glance, one seemingly harmless sentence, one moment that defied all logic. Amelia stopped at the doors of the reception. Holland turned to face him. "Who is she?" Her voice wasn't raised, but it was colder than anything he'd ever heard from her. Declan exhaled, his fingers instinctively brushing the pocket where the wedding ring still sat. "A stranger," he said. "A stranger you followed. Into a garden? In the middle of your own wedding?" Her eyebrow lifted. The anger wasn't in her voice. It was in how she stood, straight, proud, unwilling to show a single crack. "I saw you when you looked at her," Amelia said, her voice trembling now. "It wasn't familiar. It was something I've never seen in your eyes before." That was the blow. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. The air in the room stretched tight, ready to snap. Guests began to murmur. Half-taken photos were quietly abandoned. Declan's mother stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder, whispering, "Please don't be reckless. Her family is part of the network. Your whole future is built into this." The sigh that escaped him came from a place deep and weary. Her words were a soundtrack he'd been listening to his whole life. Amelia stood still, waiting for something, for a sentence that might save them. But he said nothing, because he himself no longer knew what he needed. Meanwhile, Eliza returned to her small apartment, closed the door behind her, but couldn't stop the thoughts that spilled open like floodwater. What did I just do? Why did I go back to the hotel? Why did I let it go this far? She didn't know that when she walked away, his world had begun to break apart. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea, the soft yellow glow from the overhead light spilling across the surface like faded sunlight. She thought of Amelia's eyes, not angry, not cruel, just knowing. She wasn't angry at Amelia. If anything, she admired her. Composed, graceful, certain. And what was she? A girl who walked into the wrong room, a gaze misplaced, a moment that never should have happened. Across the city, Declan stood in front of a mirror in the dressing room, staring at himself. The wedding dress behind him, perfect in size, in timing, in expectation. Only one thing was wrong: his heart. He thought of every word his mother had ever whispered, every look his father had given, every time he'd said yes with a soul full of hesitation. And then Eliza. She hadn't asked anything of him. No demands, no schemes. She hadn't even tried to be remembered. And yet he couldn't forget. "I don't think I'm supposed to be here either." Her words echoed in him now, a perfect mirror of the ache inside. As night fell, the wedding stumbled to its end in a haze of polite smiles and stiff toasts. No one spoke of the interruption. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed, laughter filled the air. But somewhere deep in that elegant room, a crack had formed, thin as thread, but enough to unravel the fabric of trust everyone believed was unbreakable. Declan didn't sleep that night, and Eliza, she stayed awake asking herself the one question that refused to go away. If I hadn't walked into the wrong room, would he have ever seen me at all? Eliza didn't sleep that night. She lay curled near the window, watching streetlights spill gold through the trees, fractured, quiet, flickering. Inside her, everything was also shifting. A wordless tide of confusion, guilt, and a trace, just a trace of something that felt like hope. She shouldn't have gone back to the hotel, shouldn't have spoken to Declan, shouldn't have allowed herself to see that look in the eyes of a man about to be married, but she had seen it, and he had looked. Across the city, Declan stood alone in his study, still dressed in yesterday's clothes. The wedding photo rested on the desk, the flowers still fresh, but he was too tired to even lift the frame. All night he'd played it back, Eliza's eyes, the way she said, "I don't think I'm supposed to be here," like she was speaking for them both. There'd been no conversation with Amelia. After the reception, no explanation to his family, no plan for what came next, only a quiet, persistent certainty he was living the wrong life. The next morning, Eliza left her apartment. She had nowhere to go, only the urge to escape the four walls, to climb out of the thoughts dragging her into the deep. And just as if the universe was quietly at work, a car slowed near the bus stop. The window rolled down. It was him. Declan. She froze, no smiles, no greeting, just a slow nod and a look that held nothing back. "You can say no," he said, "but I'd be grateful if you sat with me, just for a little while." A tiny cafe on the corner was the only place open that early. They took a seat at the back by the window. Morning sunlight slanted in, drawing uneven lines across the worn wood table. Eliza didn't look directly at him. "I didn't think you'd find me. I didn't think I wouldn't, he said. A simple answer, but something in it rang deeply true. Declan reached for the coffee he hadn't touched. I know this sounds crazy, but I have to say it. Eliza looked at him. She didn't interrupt, just waited. I think you're a sign. A sign? She echoed, tilting her head slightly. From the universe. From myself. From whatever I've been ignoring for too long. He paused, then gave a quiet, wry smile. Strange, isn't it? Me, the guy who believes in schedules and spreadsheets, suddenly talking like he believes in fate. Eliza didn't smile. She only grew still. You walked into my wedding like a mistake, he continued. But when I saw you looking around, like you didn't know where you belonged, I saw myself. She inhaled deeply before answering. I'm not someone you should pin meaning onto. I don't know anything about your world. I'm just a coincidence. There are some coincidences, Declan said, eyes steady, that feel bigger than fate. You don't know me, and you don't know me either. But I'd like you to, if you'll let me. Outside, a breeze stirred the trees. Dry leaves floated past the window, small, weightless signals from something vast and unseen. Eliza followed their path with her eyes and felt her heart flinch just once. She didn't nod. She didn't say yes. She didn't walk away either. She just sat there, in silence, across from a man who wasn't sure what was right anymore, only that this didn't feel wrong. Sometimes you don't need someone who's right for you. You just need someone real enough to make you stop and truly listen. She didn't say yes, she didn't say no, but she stayed. And for Declan, that silence was enough to know. He could never again return to being the man who followed a life already scripted. He left the cafe that morning not with confusion, but with a clarity he didn't feel the need to justify anymore. No weighing of consequences, no calculations of who might be hurt, who might be disappointed. He just knew he could no longer live even one more day behind the mask everyone believed was his face. That afternoon, the wedding was still held, rebranded as a reaffirmation, a reclamation of image after the disruption the day before. There were more guests, brighter lights, cameras in every corner. Everyone knew something had gone wrong. But everyone pretended not to. Amelia stood behind the doors, clutching her bouquet as though it were the last thing holding together her belief in something. She didn't cry. She never did. But something inside her had gone cold the moment she saw Declan's eyes turn towards someone else. Declan waited at the altar, but this time he didn't smile, not even a polite one. No nods to the cameras, no performance. Just a man about to undo everything, not for anyone else but for himself. The doors opened. Amelia entered to soft, solemn music. Each step she took echoed on the red carpet, but not loud enough to drown out the thunder in Declan's chest. He watched her. She was beautiful. Stunning, even. Perfect in the way everything had been perfectly arranged. But he no longer saw himself in that picture. The officiant smiled, his voice calm and practiced. Declan Rhodes, do you take? Declan raised his head, looked at Amelia, then scanned the room. Familiar faces, his mother, his father, friends, business partners, the people who had staked their reputations and fortunes on this day. He breathed in and out. Then, for the first time in his life, spoke the thing no one wanted to hear. I can't. The words didn't just crash into the room. They cracked the very foundation of the life he had built. Silence fell, long and cavernous. Movement stalled, cameras froze. Even hearts seemed to hesitate. I'm sorry, he said. Amelia. Everyone. But I can't walk into a life I didn't truly choose. He turned to the officiant. I don't. Amelia didn't cry. She simply looked at him, as though trying to piece together something shattered right before her eyes, unable to understand how or why. His mother gripped the armrest of her chair. His father stood abruptly. But Declan remained still, upright, eyes clear, as though this moment wasn't a collapse but a beginning. Elsewhere in the city, Eliza was folding books in the small library where she worked part-time. She didn't know what had just happened. She hadn't heard the music stop or seen the wedding dress left behind at the altar. or felt the city holding its breath as a man walked away from wealth and certainty and applause. She just knew that inside her there was a calmness she couldn't explain, as if something enormous had just shifted, but only those listening very, very closely would have noticed. Some decisions don't come from the voice in your head, but from a silence deep within your heart. Some no's don't break a wedding, they begin a new life. Are you ready to step into an ending no one expected? She didn't know exactly what had changed, only that something had. The morning after the wedding, or more truthfully, the wedding that wasn't, Eliza woke to the soft wash of early light slipping through the curtains. The room was still. The same, the old grey blanket, the warm halo from the desk lamp. But the air felt different, lighter somehow, as if the silence no longer pressed against her chest. No phone calls, no messages asking why she had stepped into someone else's life like a misprint. But she knew. It had happened. And some quiet part of her was done pretending it hadn't. Elsewhere in the city, Declan moved into a new apartment with only 2 suitcases, one filled with belongings, the other with silence. No one came with him. No assistants, no groomsmen, no mother, just him, a man who had walked away from his own wedding in front of hundreds and now stood at the fragile beginning of something unnamed, or perhaps not from 0, from 1. Because for the first time he was choosing for himself. He made coffee by hand ash the first time in 10 years, stirring with a spoon, not pressing a gleaming button. A small thing, but it felt like the start of a life that no longer needed to please anyone but himself. Eliza received his message on a cool, early evening. Coffee by the lake, the one from before. Do you have time? No. How are you? No long. Explanations, just one line. And still her heart skipped. The little cafe looked the same as the first time they met. This time no black cars parked outside. No tuxedo. No wedding lingering between them. Just Declan, in a soft grey sweater, hair a little longer, face untouched by stage light, and eyes darker now. The kind of dark that comes not from sadness, but from knowing what's worth carrying forward. She wore no makeup, only lip balm, a linen dress, hair clipped back loosely. They looked at each other, and both breathed easier, because now neither had to perform. You've heard, Teresa, he asked. About the wedding. She nodded. It wasn't your fault. His voice was gentle, like it had been waiting to say this. I know. It was the first time Eliza didn't apologize for existing inside someone else's story. And that, just that, was enough to make him exhale, unaware he'd been holding his breath this whole time. She told him about the days since, returning to the library, and how it no longer felt like a dead-end place, cooking her own meals, planting a small cactus, feeling for the first time like the sunlight through the window didn't fall on someone who didn't belong. I think I'm still learning not to blame myself for everything, she said with a small smile that felt like it belonged to someone braver. Declan didn't interrupt. He just listened, as if sitting beside her, doing nothing at all, was the most precious thing he'd ever been allowed to do. He told her about the new place, just one couch, one bookshelf, and a blank wall he planned to leave blank. About discovering the smell of rinsed rice water, about washing his own dishes and standing in the quiet to hear the soft drip from the faucet. Sounds dull, doesn't it? Yeah, he said, looking out at the lake. No, she replied. It sounds like someone learning how to live, and they didn't hold hands. They didn't touch. They didn't ask, what are we now? They just looked out at the lake, where the water shimmered faintly in the pale gold of late afternoon. That night, Eliza opened the drawer where she kept old notes, scraps of thoughts she'd never dared say aloud. She found a small piece of paper with a single sentence she'd once written and never read again. I'm not worth being seen. For the first time, she took a pen, struck it through, and beneath it, she wrote in bold, clear letters, I'm learning to believe I am. And Declan, he went home, set down his phone, didn't check the news, didn't scroll. He played a quiet piano track, then sat by the window, watching lights flicker across apartment buildings like little stories continuing in rooms he'd never enter. He smiled, not for a lens, not for anyone watching, just because, for once, he could see himself. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks or kisses in the rain. Sometimes it comes as a quiet glance and a person brave, enough to sit beside you in all the things still uncertain. She couldn't remember exactly when it began. That quiet, anchoring feeling of being at ease beside him. Maybe it was the first time they sat in a cafe, and she didn't need to invent a reason to stay. Maybe it was when he told her about the tiny basil plant in his kitchen, growing crooked, and she thought, even the small, uneven things deserve space. Or maybe it was this very morning, as Declan poured her a cup of tea without needing to. Ask what would you like, just tea, but the right kind at the right moment. And somehow's enough. They never talked about someday. No one asked, what are we? They both knew. Some things lose their truth the moment you try to name them. What existed between them wasn't loud. It didn't wear labels. But with each passing day, it quietly reaffirmed, you're here. I'm here. And that is enough. Eliza set her teacup down on the wooden table. The steam curled upward, briefly blurring the surface. Declan's little house on the edge of town had become familiar now. Not because it was grand, but because in every corner, no one had to shrink to fit. It was a place where she could read for hours without anyone reminding her to make the most of her time. Where he could leave his shoes by the door and not be told it ruined the aesthetic. Where neither had to say I love you or ask what this is. They just lived beside one another gently, like morning fog on a field. If one day you had to leave, Eliza said softly, her eyes drifting toward the window, where the meadow outside was turning gold under the sun. Declan turned to her, didn't interrupt, just listened. What would you write for me to remember? He smiled, reached into the drawer, and pulled out a worn piece of paper. I already wrote it, he said. No printed lines, no elegant design. Just a plain sheet, but the words on it were everything he'd never said aloud. I promise I will never try to understand you the way others do. I promise to sit in silence when you need space, and not walk away when you push me out. I promise never to mold you into someone else, because even your most tangled self is the reason I want to live more honestly. Eliza read each line, her hands trembling slightly. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because she'd never imagined becoming someone worthy of such vows. From her pocket, she drew out a small notebook, worn edges, frayed spine, the one she'd carried for years. She opened to the last page and began to write, I won't promise to always be strong, but I promise not to run just because I fear I'm not enough. I won't promise I'll never hurt you, but I'll learn how to heal with you. There were no cheers, no rings, no signatures, just two people, two vows, one golden afternoon, and a quiet nod that made the rest of the world dissolve. A mistake, simple, accidental, stepping into the wrong room, and it changed them, both. Not because it was fate, but because they were brave enough to stop, see each other, and choose to move forward together. True love doesn't make you grander, it simply brings you home to yourself. Thank you for walking alongside Eliza and Declan all the way to the end of their story. A quiet one, unflashy, but enough. To remind us, even the smallest misstep can save an entire life. If you saw a piece of yourself somewhere in this story, subscribe to stay close to more tender journeys. We'll meet again, somewhere soft and soon. A shy girl sings in a subway station to survive, never expecting her voice to bring a millionaire to tears, as if for a moment his late wife had returned. In the noise of the city, sometimes the only thing you truly need is for someone to hear you. And if you've ever wished that someone might understand your loneliness, and then this is the story for you. Listen to the end. You just might not feel so alone anymore. There are places in a city that people pass through without leaving a trace, nothing but the sound of footsteps fading. Lexington Avenue Station was one of those places. Each day, thousands of people slid past like ghosts, hurried, silent, avoiding eye contact, avoiding even themselves. Elena came here just after dusk when the cold white lights began to flicker with fatigue. She wasn't a street performer people stopped for. No microphone, no speaker, no sign with her name. She sat tucked beside a worn-down pillar in a corner few bothered to notice. Beside her, a battered wooden guitar, its finish chipped. Its strings dulled, looked like it had weathered more winters with her than any friend ever had. She didn't smile, didn't call out, didn't lift her eyes to the stream of strangers. But when her hands touched the strings, something inside her stirred, slowly, gently, as if the heart she kept locked inside her ribs was quietly rising, trembling, reaching. For her. And then she sang. Her voice was thin and paper-soft, like something the wind might carry away, but it wasn't weak. It had a quiet crackle behind every note, a rasp that made people pause, not out of amazement but recognition. Her voice didn't ask for attention. It didn't beg to be heard. It simply existed, like the breath of a soul surviving day by day. Elena never sang loudly. But if you happened to hear her, really hear her, you might feel something small and unfamiliar swell in your chest, a ripple that disturbed the dust of forgotten memories. James stood on the opposite side of the platform. He hadn't meant to stop at this station, but the sound of her voice made him freeze as if something unseen had pulled him still. He didn't know the song, couldn't catch every word. But the way she lingered on the last syllable of each line made something inside him ache. James, age 49, cold, precise. I never missed a meeting, a man of structure. 3 years ago, his wife, Amelia, had died after a long illness. Since then, he hadn't listened to music, hadn't cried, hadn't let himself feel much at all. He believed he'd shut the door on that part of himself, and yet now he stood there, motionless as stone, and without warning, tears slipped down his face. No one noticed. He stood in the shadow of a bench, hidden among strangers wearing headphones. But inside him a memory surged, raw and tender at once. His wife had sung like that, not the same voice, but the same fragility. The same way music had been the last shelter of a heart that was slowly falling. Elena kept her head down. She had no idea whom she was touching. She only knew that tonight felt different. She wasn't singing just to survive. She was singing to remember who she used to be. The song ended on a long, trembling note. Then, silence. No applause. No coins dropped into the wooden box by her side. Only the train, a silver blur, slid into the station, its lights flashing briefly before dimming. Elena packed up as always, but tonight, when she stood, she noticed something beside her. Business card, crisp, clean, serif italic print, James Whitaker, CEO on the back, handwritten in an unsteady script. You reminded me of someone I thought I lost forever. Elena froze. She looked around. No familiar faces. Only blinking lights, an emptying platform. She held the card in her hand without saying a word. That night, back in her small third-floor room with no television and a window that opened to a grey brick wall, Elena set her guitar gently on the worn-out chair and stared at it for a long time. She didn't know if she was ready to change anything, but she knew this. Her voice tonight had reached someone, and for the first time in many months, she didn't fall asleep from exhaustion. She simply slept, with a quiet, haunting thought tucked into her dreams. Maybe my loneliness touched someone else's. Some people pass through our lives and are forgotten in an instant. Others, whose names we never even learn, stay with us like a scratch beneath the skin, faint but impossible to erase. James wasn't a dreamer. He lived in logic, in data, in decisions made without the noise of emotion. But after that night in the subway station, he couldn't stop thinking about the girl. Her fragile, haunting voice echoed in his head whenever the city grew quiet. He'd heard hundreds of voices in his life, but only one had ever made him cry, and only one other brought that feeling back. He didn't look for her out of pity. He looked because he needed to know who was the girl who sang the ache he no longer had words for. He returned to the station at the exact time. The next day, no one. He asked the platform guard. They shrugged. Lots of singers. Who can remember? The second day he came earlier. This time he saw her, that familiar grey sweater, the worn wooden guitar. She was sitting still, not singing, just staring into her palm at a callus grown thick over time. Elena felt the weight of someone watching. She lifted her eyes and saw him, the man from before. His face wasn't threatening, but something in his gaze made her heart race. Not with emotion, with instinct. She stood, picked up her guitar and walked away without a word. James didn't follow. He simply pulled a small note from his coat pocket, placed it on the wooden bench. It read in quiet handwriting, "I'll come back, just to listen if you'll let me." Elena returned to her tiny third-floor room with a strange heaviness. She wasn't used to being noticed. She didn't like attention without explanation. Good people often came with a cost, and she wasn't sure she could afford more debt. The next day she changed her singing time, came later. But as soon as she began to sing, she saw him again, standing at a distance, silent, never approaching. Just there, hands in his coat pockets. A quiet listener. Her anxiety grew. She had built her world in the safety of passing glances, where no one stopped, where no one stayed, but he did. And that terrified her. After 3 days of this, she stopped coming. James sat on the same bench, hands clenched, no music. The station was hollow. He pulled out his phone, opened an unfinished note. "Music is how Amelia stayed alive. She told me, if I ever stop hearing things, to find someone else's song because it will guide me home." He stared at the words, then deleted them. Slipping the phone back into his pocket, he left the station, for the first time feeling he'd lost something he hadn't even had the chance to name. Elena didn't sing for 3 nights, but every evening she pulled out the old business card. That one handwritten line haunted her more than any lyric. "You reminded me of someone I thought I lost forever." She didn't know who the man was, or what he wanted. But she knew. She was afraid that if she let him close, the wounds she'd buried deep would rise, and she wasn't sure she could face them. But then, one evening, under a light rain, she returned to the station. No guitar, just herself. She stood for a long while, staring at the empty stretch of floor where she used to sit. The man wasn't there. She exhaled, relieved, and yet hollow. She sat on the old bench, fingers tracing the flaking paint, and as the rain grew heavier, she quietly began to sing. Not loud, just enough for herself to hear. Even if no one hears, it still counts. What she didn't see, what she couldn't know, was that James stood above the stairwell, hidden behind a faded sign, soaked in rain, but unmoving. He didn't need to come closer. Didn't need an introduction. He only needed to know that she was still singing, and that was enough. If it were you, would you keep your voice to yourself, or share it with a world that once refused to listen? Drop a comment with your honest thoughts. I'd really love to hear what you believe. Sometimes, a city feels like a script stuck on repeat. The same sounds, the same nameless faces, the same motions played over and over. But for James, this past week had been different. He no longer came to the subway station just to wait for the next train. He came for someone, a person whose name he didn't know, yet who reminded him of a name he'd never forgotten. This time, James made a choice. He wouldn't just watch. Elena was singing, same corner, same worn guitar. But something was different today. Maybe she knew he would come, or maybe she simply wasn't as afraid as before, just cautious. When the song ended, she bowed her head, began to pack up. But before she could slip away, he stepped forward. Not fast, not too close, keeping a respectful distance. The kind that says, "I see you, but I won't invade." "Elena," he said, her name spoken aloud for the first time, though no one had ever introduced them. She looked up, didn't ask how he knew. Just tightened her grip on the guitar strap. "I don't want to intrude," James said. His voice was low, steady, the kind used by people who are used to being heard. "But I want to help you." She studied him, her eyes sharpening, like a thorn breaking skin. "Why?" she asked. It came out dry, colder than she meant it to be. James hesitated. For the first time, he couldn't find the words. "Because your voice, yeah, there's something in it I can't forget." Her response was fast, clipped. "You pity me." Her tone wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence between them. "I don't need money, I don't need a chance, I don't need to be saved." James stepped back slightly. "No, not pity. You remind me of someone I lost." Elena let out a laugh, sharp and hollow. "And I'm supposed to feel grateful for bringing back a ghost from your past?" She turned, walked faster than before, but James spoke again, not pleading, not raised, just a small stone thrown at the ice between them. She used, "To sing like you, we sat in corners thinking no one was listening. But I listened, I never forgot that." Elena stopped. James reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small sheet of paper, creased, faded, folded many times. "This is the first song she ever wrote. Before she passed, I thought, maybe you should have it." She didn't turn, but her steps slowed, and then without a word, she descended the stairs into the deeper part of the station. James stood still, the page in his hand, unclaimed. That night, Elena lay awake in her dark apartment. The music sheet sat quietly on the desk. She had seen it in his eyes, that grief raw and without performance. It wasn't staged, it wasn't manipulative. But she didn't know if she had the strength to hold someone else's sorrow in her hands. More than that, she feared something deeper. If she accepted this offering, this kindness, she would have to face her own past. The scars she had long hidden behind the safety of song, and she wasn't sure if her voice could survive that silence. The next day, Elena didn't go to the station, nor the day after that. Her guitar leaned against the wall, its neck coated with dust, as if it, too, had fallen asleep beside its owner. Elena didn't sing. She didn't touch the strings. She didn't listen to music. One by one, she peeled the sticky notes off her wall, scribbled lyrics, half-written melodies, scattered poems, all of it bundled into a heavy bag of trash. She didn't cry. She just sat there for hours, staring at the empty space where her mother's picture once hung. Everything was gone now. The voice, the memories, the fragile reason that had once made her sing each night. She used to believe singing was the only way she could stay alive. But when a stranger entered her world, carrying memories that weren't hers, offering a gesture she hadn't asked for, something inside her fractured, not gently but sharply. She felt seen, but not in the way artists long to be seen. She felt exposed, as if someone had looked straight through the armor she'd built just to make it through the day. She planned to wrap the guitar, fold it in old cloth, store it away like a diary too painful to reopen. But when her fingers brushed the strings, they vibrated softly, like a sigh from an old friend who hadn't yet given up. Across the city, James sat in his private library, a room sealed shut for 3 years. It had once been Amelia's music room, her sanctuary. The walls still held framed photographs of her at the piano, her eyes soft and distant, like she was listening to a melody only she could hear. James hadn't entered that room since the day he carried her ashes to the sea. But today, he opened the door. Afternoon light filtered through frosted windows. Sheets of music still rested on the piano. Her tape recorder sat untouched on the shelf. He dusted it off, pressed play. The cassette whirred to life, and Amelia's voice filled the room, younger, warmer, but carrying the same ache he'd heard in Elena's. It wasn't the melody, not the tone, it was the loneliness and the truth. A voice rising out of silence, not calling to anyone, yet somehow reaching the one who needed it most. He opened a drawer, found an old photo, Amelia standing with a group of girls at a community center. Her hair tied up, smiling gently at a child with long hair and a faded sweater. James brought the photo close, his heart twisted. The girls' eyes, they sang. Was it Elena? He couldn't be sure. But the thought lodged deep. Maybe. This wasn't coincidence. Maybe Amelia had once taught this girl. Maybe the voice he heard that night wasn't just a resemblance, but a thread of her still alive in someone else. Across town, Elena stood outside a pawn shop. She'd come to sell the guitar. But when she saw the elderly owner gently polishing, A violin with a wool cloth, her feet stalled. He didn't ask what she was there to trade, just looked at her with quiet eyes, the kind that had watched many people let go. "What's the piece of music that still holds you together?" he asked. No smile, no pity. Elena stared at him for a long time, then turned and walked away, guitar still on her shoulder. That night she didn't sing, but she laid the guitar on her bed, unwrapped, and for the first time in 3 years James picked up a pen, wrote a letter to no one. "If you really are the girl in that photo, thank you for keeping a piece of her voice alive, and if you're not, thank you anyway, for making me believe that the voices we've lost sometimes still find a way back." Some pieces seem unrelated, misfits in the story, but then in one quiet moment they slip together without force, without effort, and the heart stutters, caught off guard by a tenderness it didn't see coming. Elena returned to the station after nearly a week of vanishing. No warning. No sign. It was raining that day, and she couldn't bear to sit in her small rented room where water dripped steadily from the ceiling into a cracked porcelain bowl. She brought her guitar, but she wasn't sure she'd sing. She didn't even know what she was looking for. A stranger, a familiar feeling, or maybe just an answer to the sleepless nights that had stretched on without reason. James no longer came to the station, or at least, she didn't see him. She sat on the old bench and played a tune without lyrics, a fragment from her earliest memory, learned long ago in a modest music class held in the back of a church. It wasn't famous. No one had taught it in years. But it lingered in her mind like a pressed leaf between the pages of a forgotten book. The melody rose, hesitant, delicate as thread, but full of longing, like a whisper from time itself. And from across the platform, James stepped down the stairs, just as the chorus began. He froze. It wasn't just familiar, it was Amelia's, a song she had written in her youth, never published. A song crafted for the children she taught at the small volunteer music program where she'd found meaning after her diagnosis. He moved toward her quietly. Elena looked up as he approached. She didn't flinch, didn't pack her guitar away, and this time their eyes met without walls. "Elena," he said, almost a whisper, "who taught you that song?" She leaned back slightly, then answered softly, "A teacher I had long ago, at St. Cecilia. Her name was Amelia." James exhaled, not in surprise but in recognition. Elena went on, the memory unfolding gently. "She was kind, but her eyes were always sad. She taught me to hold the last note, like you're trying to keep something from slipping away." James said nothing. He just looked at her, not as a man of wealth or power, but as someone who had just touched something he thought was gone forever. This girl, this quiet, sharp-edged girl, was part of Amelia's legacy. One of the last souls she had lit. A spark in... And the voice that had stopped James in his tracks, and it wasn't just Elena's, it was Amelia's too. Echoing, still alive in this world, Elena looked at him, and for the first time her gaze carried no resistance, no fear, no pride, only quiet gratitude. "She once told me," Elena murmured, almost to herself, "someday someone will hear you even when you're not trying to be heard." James smiled, tired but lighter than he'd been in years. "And you sang, in a subway station, not trying. But I heard you." They stood there, caught in that moment, a melody unearthing two lonely lives and threading them together through a grief still half-formed, a symphony still unfinished. Elena sat again, and for the first time, left a space beside her. Not with words, just an open place, an invitation. James sat down. The old bench creaked softly, and outside the rain kept falling, fine, steady, like the prelude to a song beginning again. Some invitations aren't simply opportunities, they're doorways, and behind those doors there are no stage lights, no applause, only yourself, the version that was once hidden, once forgotten. James didn't rush her. He knew Elena, wasn't used to being waited for, let alone being seen as important. But he also knew some music has to be heard at the right moment, Not too early, not too late. Amelia used to hold a concert every year, he told her, as they sat on the familiar bench. For the children, she taught, this year I want to bring it back, in her memory, and I want you to be the featured performer. Elena lowered her head, fingers grazing the strings of her guitar. Her hands trembled ever so slightly. I can't, she whispered. I've never stood in front of a crowd. I sing in the dark. For a reason. I need it. So I don't have to see them seeing me. James nodded gently. He didn't try to convince her. He simply shared a story. The last time Amelia performed, she already knew. She didn't have much time left, but she sang anyway. She told me, I can't control the time I have left, but at least I can choose the last song I'll ever sing. Elena didn't answer, but the words settled inside her like a quiet melody, its opening soft but echoing far longer than she expected. That night, back in her small apartment, Elena opened the drawer and unfolded a piece of paper, creased from years of hiding. A song she had written at 15, never finished. Part of the lyrics still blank, not because she didn't know what to write, but because she had never dared to. She strummed the chords, hesitant, quiet, but this time each note felt like forgiveness for herself. The next day she met James holding a sheet of paper now filled with lyrics. I'll sing, she said, voice low but firm. Not because I'm ready, but because I need to know. If my voice has truly survived all of this. James said nothing. He only nodded, his eyes rimmed with red. The week of preparation passed like a dream. Eleanor rehearsed in a small concert hall, surrounded by former students of Amelia's, now musicians, adults, carrying pieces of her memory and their instruments. They didn't ask who Elena was, but when she sang, no one needed to ask. She didn't sing to impress. She sang to touch everything that had gone unspoken. Each note was a small incision, but instead of hurting, it released. The night of the performance, Eleanor sat alone. Backstage, arms wrapped around her guitar, eyes fixed on the warm yellow light glowing from just beyond the curtain. She thought about the nights in the subway, the screech of trains swallowing her voice, the blank stares of people passing without pausing. And now, she would sing, while everyone listened. There was nowhere left to hide, no more darkness, to disappear into, only one song left and a heart finally ready to be seen. That evening, the sky held no rain, nor clarity. A soft veil of mist, like the breath of someone newly awake, clung to the glass facade of St. Cecilia Hall, a place that had once been Amelia's sanctuary of sound, and now a place made sacred again in her memory. Inside, warm golden light spilled gently over the rows of chairs like fine threads. The room wasn't full, but those who came each carried a piece of her, memories of the woman who had taught them not just notes, but how to listen inward. Backstage, Eleanor sat in a narrow room that held little more than a mirror and two wooden chairs. She looked at her reflection, not to adjust her appearance, but to ask herself, who am I now? No longer the girl who sang beneath trains, no longer the child who trembled before strangers, but not yet a performer either. She was a story just about to be told. James stepped into the room and handed her a small object. A silver necklace, delicate, unadorned, its pendant shaped like a single musical note. Amelia wore it the last time she sang, he said, his hands steady but his voice soft. I think tonight she'd want you to wear it for her. Elena took it. The light from the ceiling caught on the pendant and it glowed, quiet, not showy. She said nothing, just nodded and clasped it around her neck. The music began. She stepped onto the stage. No applause. Only stillness, as if the light spilling onto her made the entire room pause. Her hair fell simply. A white blouse. The familiar guitar in her arms. Her eyes searched for no one, but they didn't shy away either. She began to sing. Not loudly, not flawlessly, but truly. For the first time, her voice wasn't swallowed by train brakes or footsteps. Each note landed gently, like it had been searching for its home and had finally found it. The hall faded away. The world narrowed to a space where music opened doors, into the past, into the now. James sat in the front row, unmoving. The song Eleanor chose was the one she had never finished, as a child, as a runaway. But now it had a new ending, her own. It told the story of a voice once lost, reclaimed through the echo of someone else. I sang in shadows, not to hide, but to be held by someone listening. Her voice flowed like a small stream, washing over pain, softening sorrows that had long turned to stone. James bowed his head, and for the first time since Amelia's funeral he cried, not in sobs, just quiet tears, because he realized his grief had finally found its language, not through his own voice, but through someone else's. And somehow, in some unexplainable way, Amelia had returned, not in body but in music. The song ended. No applause, not at first. Only silence, but not the empty kind. A silence full and whole. Then, slowly, someone exhaled. Someone wiped their eyes, and the entire room seemed to breathe again. Elena bowed, this time not from fear, but from the quiet knowledge that her voice had been heard completely. After the performance, she stepped off the stage. James waited just beyond the wings. He didn't speak, just watched. Elena approached him and touched the pendant. Resting against her chest, "Thank you for letting me borrow her voice," she said. "I think I've found my own." And James smiled, the kind of smile that reaches all the way to the heart. No one really knows when healing begins. Is it the moment we find our voice, or the moment someone chooses to hear it? Maybe it's both. Maybe it's when two wounds recognize each other and choose to sit side by side, unhidden. The concert ended, but no one left right away. They lingered, voices lowered, as if afraid to break something fragile still hanging in the air. A whispered thank you. A mother holding her daughter's hand a little tighter. An old man quietly polishing his glasses. And somewhere, in each of them, a string had just gently vibrated. Elena didn't return to the subway station after that night. Instead, she was invited to a small gathering, not with producers, not with press, but with the founding board of a new music scholarship fund. Its name, the Amelia Voice Foundation. James sat at the head of the table. In his hand, a sealed envelope. He didn't say much. Just this: "If Amelia were alive, I believe she'd choose you, not because you sing the best, but because you dared to sing, even when no one was listening." Elena accepted the envelope with both hands. She didn't smile, but in her eyes there was a light, subtle, not flashy, the quiet kind of gratitude that roots deep and lasts. That afternoon she passed a small music shop she hadn't planned to enter, but in the display window stood a white baby grand piano. She stopped. She stepped inside. Sat down, placed her hands on the keys. For the first time, Elena didn't play to survive. She played to live, letting the sound be entirely her own, no longer buried beneath fear or memory. Across the city, James reopened Amelia's music. He changed almost nothing, only added one photo, not of the woman he lost, but of the girl who sang in her place, Elena on stage, guitar in her arms, eyes gently closed, and though her voice no longer echoed in the room, he could still hear it. That evening he wrote one final line in Amelia's old notebook. "She's not you, but in her your song lives on." A week later, Elena sent him a recording. It was the song she had never finished as a child, now whole. At the end of the letter she wrote, "I sing now, not to be heard, but because I've been heard." Later, she walked slowly across the old subway platform, her first stage. She didn't carry her guitar, she didn't need to sing anymore, but she stopped at the same spot. Looked up. The flickering light overhead hadn't changed, but the wind brushing her shoulder felt gentler. The city hadn't changed. Only she had, and she was no longer afraid. Have you ever felt like you were singing, or simply living in silence, just hoping someone might hear you? If this story touched something in you, leave a comment, a heart, or simply a quiet "I understand." And if you believe that music, or any voice, deserves to be heard, don't forget to like and subscribe to help me share more stories of healing with the world.